3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition
Huh?
of the Jake Feinberg Show. Company on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, it's such an honor to bring back a friend to the program. It's interesting because through all this milieu of content and people that I've interviewed, and there's just certain people, when they come into your zeitgeist or your thoughts, it's like immediately peaceful recognition. And it's funny because he wrote me a text today about a birthday boy still doing his thing, and knock on wood, he's still healthy and happy. Joe Porcaro, he said, what a cool force of nature, Joe Porcaro. And I was like, you know what? The same thing could be said for my guest, because it's true. What a cool force of nature. Chris Parker, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake. Great to hear you. Great to be here.
I need you to break this down immediately. I struggled. I didn't have enough time to find Chris Parker on timbales or percussion, but did you recognize that track coming in?
Sure.
Okay, now I need you to talk about this band that, again, this is the magic of music. I'm just getting hip to this band, Holy Moses, with 2 exclamation points and Christopher Parker on percussion. I'm like, where did this come? But I couldn't really find a lot of, like, real ambient percussion. But, I mean, no matter what was the band? I mean, this was a Woodstock band, right?
This is Woodstock. This is a band I joined after answering an ad in Rolling Stone in 1969. I guess the ad was in. And I was going to the School of Visual Arts at the time in New York, and was playing gigs on the weekends and stuff, taking the train and getting my drums together and then driving to Syracuse or Rochester or Vermont somewhere or something. I was doing a lot of gigs, but I was interested in joining a band that was more contemporary and really playing things that were current at the time. And this was in Woodstock, the town of Woodstock, where the band was and where the festival was. It was the summer, it was the winter after the festival. So the town was really all embroiled in all kinds of music. There were a lot of people there, a lot of different scenes going on, a lot of players. And so I drove up and auditioned and got the gig. And what the track that you were playing is from the first record, the only record that we did in 1970.
Oh, so it says 70. It says 71.
Just such a what?
It says 71. Maybe it was
71. Okay.
Yeah, but that was it's called Roll River Roll. I mean, I got to get my hands on a copy of it. This is unbelievable. Now these guys were singing 4-part harmonies. They're really channeling that sound of the band.
Yeah. Yep. And they look the part. Well, if you get the record, you'll see the cover. Practice me, but everybody else has got a beard and mustache, and it was definitely heavily influenced by the band. And I was trying to channel Levon Helm, and in later gigs, the bass player and he played tenor sax and I played baritone horn. So there were a couple of tunes where I played bass drum with my foot and played euphonium, baritone horn, and he played acoustic guitar and also tenor sax. We really tried to emulate the band.
Wait, I'm sorry. You and the bass player broke off as a duo when we're doing that?
No, that was part of the show.
Oh, that is
the guitar
that is so. Yeah. I need to see that. I mean, where's the videos of this stuff?
I wish there was video of it. That would be fun.
It's funny because I'm just reading this. First of all, the whole album's up on YouTube, which doesn't really. I like the vinyl, but so you can see all the cats' faces, and they are channeling that band canned heat kind of feel to it.
Right.
But then I'm looking here. There's a cat who commented. He said they used to play this all the time on WMMR in Philadelphia way back in the day. I mean, how great is that? That's the way at one time before full interconnection that a Woodstock band, a regional Woodstock band, the record finds its way down to just I guess WMMR is probably early FM station. I'm not even sure, but and it's being played in Philadelphia. I mean, that to me is Americana. When people say that word gets overused, but when it comes to music, the ability to take one regional music and put it in some place like the city of brotherly love, where Sigma Sound was. I mean, to me, that's just the beauty of Americana.
Yeah, indeed. We played a lot of gigs around the area, upstate New York and Massachusetts. I don't remember playing in Philadelphia ever, but we did an actual tour where we were the opening act for the Jimi Hendrix movie called Jimmy at Berkeley.
Oh,
because we had the same manager as Jimi Hendrix, and after he passed, his inclination was to make whatever money he could off of Jimmy's name, I guess. He passed away. Michael Jeffrey, his name was. But that was an odd gig. We also did a couple of dates where we were the opening act for Richie Havens, who was great. Richie Havens was really great.
So they would be playing a video of Jimmy at Berkeley, and then you guys would open that with a live set of music?
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, they were saying, again, I'm loving these comments. They said, this band ruled Woodstock back in the day. Used to hear them at Ron and Vulva's Joyous Mistake. Ron and Vulva. I mean, you must have known Ron and Vulva. You were just crushing it out of the park there every weekend, no matter what band it was.
Absolutely. Ron Marians and Velma were great.
Oh, my God.
In fact, my girlfriend, who became my wife at the time, used to make them chocolate cheesecake to sell in there at Joyous Lake.
Why couldn't we just have put a pause button at that time in America? You couldn't have not gotten it. Was just unbelievable. Did you, I mean, this is something I've been listening to a huge amount of the Jazz Crusaders recently, not the Crusaders, but when they were an acoustic group.
Uh-huh.
And it's healing me because of just sort of the, if there's one word that describes their music or Butterfield's music, Leave On, or The Dead, or any, there was a sense of urgency and vibe, even on recorded studio albums, that is so visceral, and you can feel it. And I just wonder, when you, was that just something in the milieu, in the soup of the day? I guess what I hear today is, with music, especially from my peers, records that I get foisted on me, they're good, but they, in some cases, are very overproduced, and they lack that visceral edge of just, having limited studio time, taking the first take, and just bringing a sense of urgency that was palpable, the vibe. When did the vibe, I mean, you guys had a vibe in your house growing up with 5 trap sets, but, I mean, did that have something to do with just lack of time? Like, you only had an hour to crank out an album, or it was just sort of like people were used to playing the material live so much that there was a live vibe that came off in the studios? Today you get all this cut and pasting. I know there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, I'm trying to get that idea, because right now, like Wilton Felder and Styx Hooper, their vibe is carrying me through this time.
Yeah, and Joe Sample's tunes.
Joe Sample. I mean, listen, you have no idea. Chris Parker acquired my first book, The Cats, and I can feel Joe's presence. The fact that he's in that book, and his tunes and his playing. I feel like in those, I don't know if you know that trio album he did with Shelly Manne and Ray Brown, but it's an incredible album, and nobody really knows he played like acoustic jazz, for a long time.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yep. I did a couple of gigs around the city with his son, Nick, who's a great bass player, Nick Sample.
What about the vibe? What about the vibe aspect, though? I mean, Buzzy Feeden.
Well,
yeah, I mean,
all those things you said are true. There was only 8 tracks, possibly 16 tracks, at that time to record, six luxury. You could have more than just the bass drum and the snare drum and an overhead for the cymbals mic. You could have a hi-hat mic too, which was revelatory. And the fact that you got in the studio, one small room with all the guys, maybe a couple of gobos separating you, but otherwise you were trying to duplicate or emulate what you did live, So there was their urgency to it and camaraderie to it, and the music itself was fresh and new. There was a lot of stuff, there was a lot of stuff happening, and there were no rules. Anything went. We could mix blues and jazz and funk and R&B and Zydeco, and we could mix with country and western. We could mix all these styles, and nobody could say, hey, that's incorrect. So, especially in Woodstock, there were all the different disparate influences from all different parts to that town, and everybody wanted to be a part of it, and everybody wanted to fertilize and inseminate everybody else.
This is good. Dude, cross-pollination or something. It just,
exactly.
It was, did you wind up, I was just thinking because I know there were a lot of different scenes, but they weren't like exclusive scenes. Did you ever wind up playing with William Cox and Jimmy in that realm? Buzzy Featon went over there and he said he couldn't even hear the music. It was so loud. But they were just like cranking it up to 10. And you Salt.
No.
You ever get over to play with Jimmy?
Nope, I never did. My girlfriend, who became my wife and is now my ex-wife, at the time played drums.
Wow.
And she joined a band with the girlfriend of another musician, and they rehearsed at Jimmy's house on Jimmy's equipment. And that was as close as I got. They played the drums and the bass and stuff. God, I can't remember where the house was, but he had a great spread somewhere in Mount Tremper, I think.
This is interesting because Chris Parker is also we've talked before about his painting and how that translates over to the music and the different palettes and the color mixtures and the synesthesia. But I just want to be clear on All Music Guide, which is not the Holy Grail, but I did find Holy Moses there. It says in 1972 that you did photography for Mark Almond. Is that accurate? Have you ever? Because it says photography, and Danny Richmond was in that band, but I wasn't sure if you knew. So is that a mistake? That should be corrected.
That's a mistake. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's pivot out. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to throw this in for you right now, CP, and then we'll come back and break it down.
As you know, I teach jazz history, so I had to research a lot of stuff. I think the most revolutionary period in American music occurred at the end of the 30s into the 40s. Now, and to understand, in my view, the state of the business today, in fact, or at least up until the 60s and 70s, you need to understand this background. And one is this. We're kind of skipping over the very early history of jazz. See, as a jazz historian, my history of jazz starts in Egypt. Ancient Egypt.
Great, that's awesome.
Africa,
yes.
Yeah. We don't have time to go through all of that, and it goes through the migrations and, of course, the transplanting of the African people here and the mix and the blend that took place. Skipping over that.
No, actually, could you talk about that? Is such a fascinating thing. If we could talk about that, the indigenous part of it, that would be great.
Well, let me say this. When I started teaching jazz history back in the 80s in New York at City College, and of course, I've made many trips to Europe. One time I was in Europe, must have been mid 80s, and was over there with the Boom group, and we were in Paris, and it was a big festival, a lot of musicians, and on that festival was this is what I'm getting ready to tell you is the way I usually start my history lectures. On that trip was some classical French musicians. So they were, I think they were working, backing up some French singers or something. So what they are related to the French jazz musicians. They say, oh, well, jazz is all right, but our music is greater. We're greater because we have a 2,000-year history behind us. So the guys from the French cast told me that. I said, wow. I said, not that they can and should think like that. I said, man, listen to this. I knew then that was like a trigger. I said, I'm going to have to go back and do a lot of research. I'm going to have to make jazz a continuum. A continuum. See, people speak of jazz and they say, well, it's only about 100 years old. No. Mm-mm. First of all, jazz, the definition of jazz, the generic definition is it is a blend. It is a mix of predominantly African, European, some degree American Indian elements whose intrinsic ingredient is improvisation. Now, it's very generic. Okay, the point being is that usually if you get any of these books, the African side is very neglected. It's a great neglect there. It is a blend. Okay, let's examine the African side. I say to understand, and then the term jazz is a derivative of a derivative. That's what I call it. I go back to Kemet, ancient Egypt. That's where indigenous African culture began. You had a lot of people coming in. Then you had migrations. A lot of people don't know this. People in the Sudan and ancient Egypt migrated to West Africa. Many of them stayed, but they stayed because they wanted to get a lot of them left because of the constant influx of people. The great West African empires began and started in what is called the Middle Ages, 10th century, 9th and 10th century. These were the people who migrated from ancient Sudan to West Africa. These are facts. We don't have time to get into it. Now, after you examine that, you have to understand the transplantation, the Atlantic slave trade. And what I deal with, two subjects, that is exactly one, is called syncretism and acculturation. Syncretism are the African people who went under the Latin Catholic colonizers. French, Spanish, Portuguese. They went to places like Cuba, the Caribbean, Brazil, Haiti, and then acculturation. These are the Africans who went to North America. It's very important. It's important to understand the psychospirituality of what happened to these people. See, so if you notice the African people who went to Cuba and went to Caribbean, they were able to fuse their religious beliefs with Catholicism because of the resemblance of the hierarchy of saints, which we have Santeria. They saw the same saints. They endowed the saints of Catholicism with their own saints. This is the basis of Santeria, of Santeria, to endow Ogun with St. Patrick, Shango with John the Baptist. This is the essence of Santeria. I'm not going to get into heavy
No, but
detail.
I have a question for you because this is a great.
Well, I mean that could have gone on. That could have gone on for hours. I apologize. You have any idea who that is?
Warren Smith?
You know, it's a good guess because he said M Boom. That was my interview with Joe Chambers from 2012.
Oh, Joe Chambers.
Did
Wow.
you? Did you?
I've never spoken to him.
You've never talked? Yeah, he is an interesting cat. I mean, I just that it's Duke Ellington's birthday, and it's such a high honor to talk to a master musician who's like you, like who's always learning. He said something right at the beginning that the most progressive time in jazz was the late 30s and early 40s. And I wanted you to, you know, being that your dad was real hip, and I wanted you to talk about, you know, just free associate on when you thought that it was the most expansive progressive time in instrumental music, because like Duke said to people, you know, someone said, well, do you consider your music black music? And he's like, I make music for all people. And he didn't necessarily like that term jazz. And I just kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about in your mind when you believe there was incredible amount of progressive flow in music. I tend to get caught up in the like the Woodstock times, the late 60s, early 70s, but I know that stuff preceded it. A lot of stuff preceded it. So I kind of wanted you to just riff any way you wanted on that.
Well, 60s was definitely formative. You know, popular music really got taken over by a younger generation, but just before that, the 50s was really inventive. I mean, with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Max Roach, who was part of Boom and Warren Smith, that was coming out of the swing era, and they really changed things up. I mean, there were arrangers who worked for Benny Goodman, Fletcher Henderson, and there were big bands that incorporated more and more jazz into what they played rather than the big band arrangements, which were primarily for dancing.
Interesting.
For people to dance to, you know, and once the 50s hit and people started to experiment with playing over chord changes and stuff like that, the fact that it was too fast for dancing or too angular for dancing, that stopped mattering to them. You know, it became music for music. And I mean, in terms of composition, Duke leads right into Monk, as far as I'm concerned.
Explain,
you know,
and I just explain that this is to anybody listening, a layperson or someone that's going to listen to this in 50 years. Break it down.
You broke up. What?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, break that down. That transition from Duke to Bird.
From Duke to Bird or Duke to Monk.
I mean Duke to Monk. Duke to Monk. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Duke to Monk. Well, Duke Ellington was part of the, you know, big band scene, and certainly his orchestra played for dances and played for entertainment and stuff like that. But he was always composing stuff that would spotlight the members of his band, whether it was Harry Carney or Paul Gonsalves or Sam Woodyard or Sonny Greer before that on drums, or Johnny Hodges or Barney Bigard. You know, each one of those instrumentalists had a certain thing that Duke was really fond of and really tuned into. So he would write in Fantasy or The Mooch or his tunes, you know, where he would spotlight that guy, and that particular guy would take a solo and improvise over the changes that Duke wrote. And this was, to me, that's really the beginning of jazz improvisation that led to bebop. And those ideas, loose melodic ideas over chord changes, is what leads to Monk's compositions, where it sounds like almost certain tunes, you know, like Evidence or Epistrophe or Rhythm and Language. It sounds like random notes on the piano. You know, he's playing a cluster here and a cluster there, and then it goes up to the goes up to the 4 chord, and he plays a few other clusters here, and the close harmony, fingers right next to each other on the keyboard over that, where back to the changes that he wrote the tune over. And some of those tunes, like Bright Mississippi, can be, it's linked directly to Sweet Georgia Brown. There's a bunch of tunes that he wrote, Blue Monk, I forget which one that is linked, but where he took the changes to a normal, a Stephen Foster tune or a Broadway tune, and then wrote his own melody over that. That's exactly what Duke Ellington was doing. He took changes that were familiar for the day, but then he had one of his guys, Cootie Williams or whoever, solo over it and use that melodic information to be the basis for the tune or the next tune that he wrote. So, like there's a great Duke Ellington album, Live at Newport, where he plays this long composition called Diminuendo in blue and Crescendo in blue. Yeah. And Paul Gonsalves takes like 42 choruses. It's basically a blues. But Paul Gonsalves never runs out of ideas,
Wow.
The band is just cooking behind him. And you listen to these choruses, and it's like a history of jazz. He never runs out of ideas, and he keeps going. That to me is the logical connection, between the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s.
This is so. You think that Monk? Was there a direct link from Duke to Dizzy as well, or did Dizzy come as an offshoot of Monk?
Those guys were simultaneous. Monk and
Same
Dizzy
time.
and Charlie Parker and Max Roach and Roy Haynes. Yeah. All kind of existed in the same space, and everybody had new ideas they wanted to try out, and new changes over familiar tunes, whether it was The Stars Fell on Alabama or Surrey with a Fringe on Top. They would take those familiar tunes and come up with new heads, new lines to play over them.
You're blowing my mind right now. I just want to read this. I mean, Chambers was exhaustive, but this is what I really wanted you to hear. He said, by the time you get to Jass, Jass, it's 1890. Right. It's 1890 at Storyville, where it gets nurtured. Then we get to the swing era. It became the popular music. It was nothing but jazz. Right. A key thing that happened was something. Now, this is important. I need Parker's analysis of this. A key thing that happened was something called the 30% surtax. It was a mandate from the U.S. government from the start of the war, World War II, that levied a 30% tax on ballrooms. Not just ballrooms, but baseball games and football games, even some opera. It was a tax that they levied on ballrooms, which were the main venues for big bands. This is what killed the big bands, because the ballroom owners could not maintain the dance policy and keep up with the rest of the bills. Most of the big bands folded, and after the 40s, they turned these ballrooms into clubs with tables and chairs for musicians of that time, like Bird, Max. They were concentrating on being virtuosos because there was no dance policy. If you look back at pictures and books from that time, you'll see signs that say no dancing. People say you can't dance to modern jazz. No, it was the 30% sales tax.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, have you heard that before? I never. I mean, that was just.
No, I never heard that. I just finished reading. There's a new Buddy Rich biography called One of a Kind, written by a Swedish guy, Pell Lindström, I think his name is. Very good, and it goes chronologically from when Buddy was born, and born literally into a vaudeville family, and how he became the star of the show, and then how he joined bands and started sitting in with people and became, the biggest drummer of the big band era, and then how he also couldn't leave that era, wanted to continue to have a big band long after none of the other big bands could keep going. And it's mainly Frank Sinatra, supported him so he could keep his band. But that does come up in the book, that there were no places to play, and then towards the end he's playing, college auditoriums and even high schools because there were no ballrooms. That makes perfect sense. I never knew about the 30% tax.
Well, this is why I'm gonna give Chris some enlightenment today, and he can go off talk to Pops about that, Papa Parker, and I mean to me it's remarkable because they were like, oh, you can't dance. I mean, the whole line is you couldn't dance to that music, but in fact they said, this is. There's no dancing anymore. Like, it's fascinating because I really think you can dance to bebop. I mean, it's frenetic, but but I mean, like that whole idea that you couldn't dance to the music. In fact, it went from. The question really is, at that point they were cultivating this new musical vocabulary, and they may never have called it bebop, but it was new language, much faster. And even if the ballrooms had existed, you wonder, can you imagine bebop in a ballroom setting? I mean, that'd be pretty remarkable.
It would indeed.
Speaking of Joe Sample, he told me when the Nighthawks were touring, that was Hubert Laws, they all grew up in the same wards, Wilton, Wayne Henderson, Joe, Styx, and Hubert Laws was in the band. And Joe was playing organ, and the organ was in the clubs. It had been taken out. It was before. Well, they had moved it out of the church and it had come into the clubs. It was in the '60s, and he would show up for gigs and he used to say, he's like, "What's my dog du jour of the day? What am I going to face today? How many black keys are going to be missing? I mean, how am I going to pound this thing back into tune?" And I just think that when you were on the road, especially early on. Limited sort of resources for people. Were there tours that you would go on any kind of genre of music, especially early on in your career, when you didn't have it? You'd show up and the club would have a trap set. I mean, and you'd have to adjust to that. Did you ever go through anything like that?
No, I always had my own stuff with me.
You always brought your stuff.
Yeah, in the studio. When I first started working in the studios, they would often have just the bass drum and a snare drum. I mean, just the bass drum and a tom-tom, and you would bring a trap case that you could, if you were lucky, you could get a cab to pick you up with your trap case.
Right.
Which had snare and cymbals, and hi-hat and bass drum pedal, so you could make do with whatever was in the studio. It wasn't until I'd say mid-'70s or so, when recording studios started having the drums, complete set of drums, and still you would bring your cymbals. But the first dates, a lot of the first dates that I did, they just have a bass drum, or they have a bass drum, small tom, and floor tom, and you bring everything else in your trap case.
Did you ever go to an early session without your trap case and just use what they had?
No, I was always pretty prepared.
I love it. Did you know Ron Frangipani?
I know that name.
Yeah, I know. It's the dude is so mercurial. He was this amazing producer, and in the '60s.
Producer,
yeah, and amazing piano player. But I think he worked a lot in the Brill Building, and I think that predates Parker. Maybe did you get in there at all to play? Did you record in there at all or no?
I went in there to meet with Paul Simon a couple of times, and I passed offices where it was Don Kirshner's office, and I passed Carole King and Jerry Goffin's office. I did some recording in there a couple of times where somebody was doing song demos. I can't remember who it was for, though, but I remember running into somebody in the elevator, and we were both doing the same thing. In fact, there was a drummer, lady drummer, Sue Evans, who.
Oh, I have been trying to get her. I have been trying to get her on the program. She is not a big fan of Jake Fine. She didn't know where I was coming. I'm obsessed with her, man.
She's great.
She is the best. I'm often seeing her in percussion settings on Steve Kuhn albums. I don't think you're the drummer on those albums, but she's always playing like percussion.
Judy Collins, and I played with Pierre Paul and Mary, and she did a lot of dates on drums.
On trap drums. That's amazing.
On traps, yeah. She was very good.
Did you, speaking of M Boom, obviously Joe, you didn't hang with him. Did you ever get a chance to hang with Omar Clay or Freddie Waits?
Freddie Waits and I met a couple of times when he would come up to McKell's when Stuff was there. And I saw him live a bunch of times, I think at the Vanguard or maybe Cafe A Go-Go or Village Gate, not Cafe A Go-Go, Village Gate.
Sure.
I remember seeing Freddie Waits and liking him a lot. And then Nasheet Waits, his son, was around.
I guess more to the point, Max was doing something incredibly experimental down in it wasn't the West Village, it was like the west side, lower west side of Manhattan. There was a musical enclaves there. We talked about the loft scene. But did you work in some kind of percussion ensemble? I mean, everything was so percolating and hot in the 60s. I mean, M Boom was more like early 70s, but were you part of a percussion ensemble of any kind?
No, not really. I mean, my brothers and I were always a percussion.
Yeah, I mean, give me a break. The Parker ensemble was cooking the groove, man. I mean, dude.
I was thinking about this gig the other day that I did with there was a pianist. I don't know if he's still alive or not. Ron Thomas.
Dude, he is. I've interviewed Ron. Dude, are you kidding me? What a badass that guy is.
Yeah.
Holy.
We did a lot of gigs.
You did?
Yeah, we did a lot of gigs for a couple of summers with a trumpeter named Timothy Buck.
Huh.
The bass player was John Heek, and Ron Thomas on piano. He was killer. And we did this one gig at a museum, I think, outside of Philadelphia, where I played a sculpture instead of a drum set.
Holy shit. No way, dude. No, wait, what was it?
Yeah.
It was like bells and like little things hanging off of it? Or
it was a sculpture. They had taken like thin rebar and welded it to a central piece, but the rebar was all different lengths. So anywhere you hit it with a mallet or with a stick, you'd get a different note. And then some of the clusters of rebar were close together, so you hit that and you get a chord. And it was not unlike playing multiple cymbals. It had a great sound, and the bass I put a bass drum pedal on the bass to hit the bass of this and to get this thump. It was a silly gig.
Yeah, it was very avant-garde. I mean, Ron Thomas could play serious angular jazz. So I mean that is bad. We got another voice for Chris Parker here on Duke Ellington's birthday, honoring Papa Parker, who was one of the hippest cats around. I oftentimes think about my dad and other people from that generation, although your dad's older than my dad, but they were lost in a classical bag. And I mean, Monk was just pervading the Parker household, which is just so cool. Take a listen to this, and we'll come back.
Well, the first here clearly were the drummers who continued to play four on the floor, but accented notes within the four. So a good drummer, for a little technical thing here, when a drummer played the bass drum on all four beats, he usually, especially in the earlier days, he used a lamb's wool beater, which gave a very diffuse sound. It wasn't like hitting it with a wooden beater or a hard felt beater. And plus they had calf heads, which brought a whole different dynamic and sound to the drum. So what the drummers would do, and there's some later pictures of Krupa, especially, he would play the bass drum on all four beats softer, with his heel down, and then he would accent notes within that by bringing his heel up and using his whole leg to make a bigger stroke, to make a louder sound. And Buddy Rich did this too. So those were the first cats that I've really heard live at Jazz at the Philharmonic when I was a kid. And of course, like every other drummer, you watch everything they do. And I noticed that they could keep 4 on the floor, but they could get away from that to play syncopated patterns and then come back, or to catch a band figure and then come back to the 4. So that was my introduction to that. And then I would read in books about how Kenny Clark was the first drummer to quit playing 4 on the floor and to use it as, like he would his left hand, to play non-repetitive comping figures. And I say, okay, I'm going to check that out. I could never really figure out what he was doing until I met Ed Thigpen, who was a great jazz drummer. And Ed and I became good friends. I'm very, very honored by that. And he had seen Kenny Clark live, and and one day we were talking, and he said, I don't know how it came up, he says, one thing that really, really makes me angry. I said, what's that? He says, these guys who write these jazz history books and come out with these ridiculous statements. And he says, the one that kills me is that Kenny Clark revolutionized jazz drumming because he quit playing the bass drum on all 4 beats. And Ed said, that is absolutely false. He said he played soft 4 on the floor and accented within that. Same way Max Roach did, same way Blakey did. So there was a great misconception that all of a sudden everybody thought, oh, wow, man, everybody's done with 4 on the floor. I got some recordings of Tony Williams with Miles. Or if you've got a good amplifier and can switch channels on it, you can hear him playing soft 4 on the bass.
Mr. Park, you want to take a guess at who that is?
No, I don't recognize that voice.
A similar sort of rhythm to you is a great drummer, Ed Soph.
Oh, I know that name. God.
Yeah, no, Soph, I mean, Woody Herman's band,
yeah.
But
And a great teacher. He's a North Texas State guy, right?
Exactly, and like you, is able to oftentimes articulate things that are often inarticulable. But essentially, I'm learning this stuff all the time. That was an interview I did with him from January of this year, and
oh wow,
it's like, oh my God, because Kenny Clark, you even talk to people that played with him, and they said he was the first one to use the bass drum for rebound and accent, but in fact he was just playing 4 on the floor, but very lightly. And I wasn't sure if were you hip to that? I mean, that was very revelatory, and obviously just proves that history is skewed in many ways. But I just wanted you to talk about if you were aware of that, and I mean, clearly it drove Ed Thigpen crazy.
No, I was aware of that style and the books that you read. The certain examples, certain books they have. That's what's written. 4 on the floor on the bass drum, and I don't remember them talking about a lamb's wool beater, but I discovered that for myself with a large bass drum.
Yes.
That I had. That was the way to play it, to get this lamb's wool beater and not hard felt, or certainly not wood, to get that sound. And you ride the bass drum quarter notes, and you might accent the 4th quarter note or accent the first one at the beginning of a section. But otherwise you're kind of tapping your foot lightly on the bass drum. The whole thing of bass drum patterns and the way we play now is different and kind of makes more sense with what the bass player is doing. When figures started to come up to help whatever was going on in the song. Ba-boom, bump, ba-boom, bump.
Right. No, in one of our earlier interviews, you said today it's a reggae tone with a lot of 4 on the floor bass drum.
Right. Yeah, reggaeton.
Reggaeton, exactly. First of all, I want to get this lamb's wool beater with calfskin heads, is that in conjunction, or are those
Yep.
two separate, or is that two separate? You put lamb's wool over the calfskin, or I mean, I don't even know what that. How does that
No,
work?
it's a calfskin head as opposed to a plastic head, and it fluctuates with the weather. Like I don't know what your weather is like today, but it's very rainy here today.
Right.
So today would be a day when the bass drum head is pretty slack,
Interesting.
and you might have to going to crack, based on the humidity. And the lamb's wool beater, is a very fat beater. It's not covered with anything, although I used to improvise, put a towel around a felt beater to get a more spreader, more spready kind of sound.
What would it be today? It's 102 and dry. What would it do in that climate?
Your calfskin head would get very tight.
Oh my God, amazing! I mean, it's really amazing. In a non-climate controlled environment, especially back in the '60s when there was not a lot of air conditioning or out. I mean, it must have really been interesting to get those different feels or sounds.
Oh yeah, yeah. You could tell, playing outdoors or playing indoors, even with plastic heads. You would have to tune up the snare drum to get it to the pitch that you wanted to play at, because overnight would loosen it.
I noticed that. He's still with us, and it's his birthday today. Is Joe Porcaro, and and what's really cool is that you guys were just a little bit down the road from each other, I-95. I mean, different time periods a little bit, but he had gigs with Al Lepak, Hartford Symphony, and he was also playing for belly dancers, playing in 7, 9, and 11, playing this Arabic music. And I'm thinking Parker was 11 years old being dropped off at the strip clubs. Parents were saying, "Great, here, we'll drive you, man." By the way, you're in my third book. It's coming out real soon. I'll send you the excerpts. But that's the line is, "We'll drive you, Chris." It's like, so. I mean, did you? I mean, was Porcaro on your radar at all before he moved to LA, or did you even know his sons before him, or how did that even work?
Well, I certainly knew about Jeff.
Of course,
he was legendary, having played with Sonny and Cher at 18 or whatever. I certainly knew about him, and I had heard about Joe Porcaro in conjunction with Neil Richards and with Shelly Manne and with a whole LA jazz scene. I knew that name early on, early 60s. I was already reading about Joe Porcaro and this whole LA scene, Shorty Rogers and Stan Kenton and
Jerry Mulligan.
Jerry Mulligan, yeah, and I love Jerry Mulligan. Actually jammed with him a couple of times, but
really,
Will Lee's dad was also named William F. Lee. He was the dean of the School of Music at University of Miami, and he was friends with all these guys. Dizzy would come to the house, Jerry Mulligan would come to the house, and they would hang out, between doing clinics or whatever they were doing, teaching at the University of Miami. And Will and I were down there once playing on tour with Barry Manilow, and we had a day off. And we went to his dad's house, and Jerry Mulligan dropped by, and we jammed in the afternoon.
Because Jack Wilkins told me that Manilow was a badass jazz player, I think, or he could play some jazz. He was in a quartet with him. This is going back in the
really?
60s. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Wow.
I mean,
He's a good pianist, no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe not jazz. Maybe not.
Jazz.
I mean, it was just the popular music. Mulligan and Parker and Will Lee cooking the groove, and that's a power trio right there.
Right. And Dr. Lee played piano. Will on bass, me on drums, Jerry Mulligan on baritone.
Oh my God! If there's CP, if there's one, I mean, you are a model of you serve the song. You've been serving the music for years, and you know, but this is, I would assume, I mean, we're talking to a cat who was dying of pneumonia, flying back from New Orleans, and wound up at Stuff playing a gig because he just had to play. And you know, I'm not sure if you've ever spent this much time away from the bandstand, but if there's one thing that you look forward to bringing a new found enthusiasm or perspective or point of view after this hiatus, what will it be when you return to the bandstand?
Oh God, to be grateful to be able to play music and to play it with people and to be on the same stage with people at the same time and playing music. It's going to be a revelation. I'm going to be so grateful to be able to do it. This being, you know, 1/4 of a Zoom screen or being,
it just doesn't do it. No,
it's okay. I mean, this is the new normal. This is America 2.0.
Oh my God! I mean, America 1.3 or something. I mean, it's going backwards.
Yeah.
No, because that Zoom, the audio on Zoom is a major crisis. It's not good. It's just not.
I know.
You know?
I know, and there's an endless delay. You know,
Endless
millisecond delay. I remember this from when they tried to do ISDN in the studio. You know, and we figured ISDN meant it still does nothing because there is, you know, 2 or 3 milliseconds. No matter where you hit, it was wrong. No matter how you tried to lock up. I remember doing a record. She was in Nashville and I was in New York. Sandy Denny, who was like a
I know that name. I know that.
Nashville singer.
Yeah.
Good singer. But I was listening to her in the headphones and playing with her, and it was wrong every time. You know, you couldn't, and they were using ADAT machines, you know, Alessi ADAT machines, 4 ADATs or something stacked on top of each other, and you couldn't get it right. You know, you try to calculate, and I got pretty good at this playing with a click track. Somebody says we want it laid back. You know, okay,
yeah.
I can play this much behind the click consistently all the way through. I knew how to do that, but this was different. This was, you know, electronic, random electronic, you know, 2 millisecond delay here, 3 milliseconds there, just enough to ruin the groove, you know. It was impossible. It was really hard. Phil Ramone was the producer, I remember.
What year was that?
Had to be mid-'80s, I guess.
Do you worry? I mean, it's maybe self-evident, but realistically, how many steady gig the clubs that you played at, do you think will be able to survive? I mean, most people don't understand that, like, we're almost in a depression. I mean, we're at that point where it's like the inequality is so severe, and that's one reason that this virus is taking so many people that have low means and things like that. But as it relates to culture and it relates to the holistic nature of the clubs that remain, how many do you think will pull through from this?
Ridiculous if they do. You know, places like the Vanguard, and I'm getting emails from Birdland and from the Blue Note. Blue Note is a giant corporation.
Right.
You know, I don't know if they can. I think there's a huge department store at the head of it, or there used to be. I don't know who owns Blue Note anymore, but I know they have clubs all over the world. Birdland is a New York thing, and they're sending out emails. You know, please contribute. They're asking for people to contribute to keep things going, and that was a well-attended, you know, well-populated. I mean, the prices were high too. You pay, you know, $80 for one set of music, but the quality that they brought in, Gianni, the owner there, you know, it was worth it.
Right.
It was worth it to go see whoever it was. I don't know. They got the space, but they got rent to pay. They got the staff to pay. It's going to be. And this, as you said earlier, you know, entertainment and live sports are going to be the last things to come back.
I mean, it's in a communal fashion. I mean, they might play the NFL games, but it'll be in front of an empty stadium. So it's like,
Right,
it's like, this is very hard for me, but the only way that I know how to be resilient in this time is to talk to my brothers like Chris Parker, who always center me emotionally. And CP, I'm going to get you the excerpts for book 3 for your approval. And I always love connecting with you, man. And say hi to your pops for me, and stay safe. And I'll see you on the other side, hopefully.
Jake, did you happen to see the tribute to Prince 2 weeks ago on CBS?
No. Were you featured?
Stage presentation where all these people are standing on the same stage, playing at the same time, playing together. That was really uplifting. And Sheila E. is a force of nature.
That's what it's really about. It's about having a conversation on stage with real people, and man, like. So there's no easy answers, but we're just going to have to pick up the conversation. And I'm just going to be playing Holy Moses the entire time from here until at this point. We need those soulful roots. I mean, all those spirits are hopefully looking down on us, and it's Duke's birthday today, poor Carl's birthday.
Yeah.
It's there's no reason to wallow in it, but it is disconcerting to think that for the safety of the public that live communal music may take months, if not years, to return. So I pray we can come up with a vaccine and so I can get back on the road again. I've been off the road for a while. It's hard,
I hear you, man. I hear you. I miss going out to the clubs and drawing. If I'm not actually playing, I looked through my sketchbook. The last people I heard were Matt Wilson with his trio,
right?
And Cafe Bohemia in New York, and I saw Simon Phillips before then. I saw Randy Brecker and Ada Rovati at Iridium. Saw some great music. Right up until March 13th was my last gig.
That's right.
So,
the entire my birthday, and then. Tragically, I lost my spirit brother here to a heart attack. At least that's what it was. They said it was on that Monday the 16th, and then we were fully shut down on the 18th. So no matter what, it will be America 3.0. It will be a completely new situation, and but we need to be united as a people in order to solve this.
Yep.
So. Much love to you, CP, and we'll talk real soon, man. It's always good to hear you.
All right, Jake. Thanks so much for calling.
Always, brother. Be good.
All right.
Yeah.
You too.
Later.
All right.
We'll be back with Paul Lennard on the other side right after this.